I kill people for a living. I kind of like it.
Now I'm going to change gears a little bit.
Okay.
We're going to change gears here. I'm going to move over to the other story that you did, multi-part story you did, the Codex Alera.
Okay.
It was six-part novel, and again, this is what sounds like the way you're doing with Cinder Spires, completely different.
Yes, very different world, very different setting, very different, an intentionally completely opposite protagonist. You know, the only guy in his world who can't do magic. You know,
very weird when I first read it. I was like, wow.
Right. Right, which was very tough the first book, because as the kid, you know, he starts off as a farm boy. It's a fantasy book, so he starts off as a farm boy in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Because that's where fantasy start, and I didn't make that rule. But
it's kind of true, actually. Now that I'm just thinking about that, a lot of
fantasy start off farm boy in the middle of nowhere. That's how it goes, you know.
Even some sci-fi epics.
Oh yeah, just a few. But then as he grows and develops as a character, I mean, you realize that he was. You know, I kind of designed him to be the perfect guy to take on all these huge problems that were going to be facing his world, because he never had any power, and he had to learn to use his brain first.
Right.
And that really made him far more formidable than anybody really considered it would be possible. So that's one of my as a writer, it's one of the accomplishments I'm more proud of is writing that character and bringing him into fruition. But
yeah, because Tavi's arc over the story, and I won't go into it too much because you should read it, is quite fascinating. You know, like he starts off at the farm, and then where he eventually leads to, and it feels like the perfect 6-part epic story. Would you ever think about going back?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something I may do someday. There are other stories there that I could tell. The Cursor Academy that gets reopened after the end of the last story, which has got, you know, the first Marat Cursor, the first Khanum Cursor, and which is being run by Aaron, who all the fans refer to him as the crow-begotten Batman, because he's another character who doesn't have a lot in the way of the super cool magical stuff, so he's just had to be clever and ferocious.
Yeah.
And he's the chief spy. And that would be some really fun and interesting stuff. We're working with that. I could also go back, you know, a couple of hundred years in the future and kind of see the results of everything all the characters did, and there would still be some of the characters who were around. So we'll have to see how it turns out. But I don't have any specific plans for it at the moment. But it's something I could go back to one day.
Cool. Yeah, it would be really cool. I think it would, you know, like you said, like there's some great possibilities depending on which avenue you want to take. Now, changing gears, but still going back a bit of Harry here. You've got comics. Yeah, the series has been translated into comics.
Right.
First 2 books, and now you've got one right now that you're writing.
Right. We did the first one, which was Welcome to the Jungle, which was the one that I actually wrote the whole script for, which they were very tolerant to put up with me doing that on account of, you know, I write novels, I don't write comics, and so I was a novice comic book writer.
Right.
You know, I had all these problems where they'd say, Jim, you can't have the characters exchange this much dialogue. I'm like, well, why not? It's like, if they're exchanging this, because we have to put it in word bubbles on the page, and if they're exchanging this much dialogue, there's no space to draw anything else. It's like, oh, I get that. Okay, let me figure out how to reduce this exchange to almost nothing, you know. And it's a very, plus you have to, I mean, you're working with other people. It's a much more collaborative effort, and it was something that I wanted to do and I thought was really neat. And I didn't really have the time to keep that up and keep doing everything else, because this was all happening about the same time.
Right.
That I was writing 2 books a year and did a Spider-Man novel one year and did a graphic novel that year too. So that was, my schedule was still wrecked from that. I'm still trying to keep up from that year. But I got some help from some fans who are, there's basically a board of fan consultants who you know, like check the art and remind people, no, that he doesn't have a ring on that finger, it's on this finger, and I mean, it's stuff that I would never catch.
Right.
Because me, it's just like it's just not. It doesn't that much detail doesn't stick with me. There's too much loose stuff running around in my head that I don't remember all of it. The fans have only seen one version of it, so they can go, no, wait, this is how it is. This is the canon. Whereas in my head, I've got multiple drafts of every book, plus all the books that I could have written and decided not to write.
Right.
You know, so it's too much for me to keep track of. So when I need to run down a detail or to remember something a fact that I don't remember from the book, I go to the Fan Wiki, because that's far more accurate than anything I've got.
That seems so weird to me. Yeah, I would think that you would just remember that stuff, but I guess, you know, like you said, you get so many novels.
Like I said, yeah. I mean, it's by the time I write a book, I'll write a rough draft, and then I might pretty it up once.
Right.
So that's a couple of drafts that I've seen, and then that goes to the beta readers. The beta readers read it, and it comes back, and then I make changes. So that's draft number 3, and that goes to the editor, and the editor has changes, comes back to me. That's draft number 4, and then the copy editor reads it and sends it back, and it's drafted with detail changes. That's draft number 5, and the line editor will do it, and it'll come back with like grammar and stuff like that, and that's draft number 6. And then the proofer sends the stuff back, and they'll have always be a few changes that I need to make then, and that's draft number 7. So by that time, I've got 7 different versions of slightly different versions of the book in my head. Damn it! I hate that when you don't sneeze. Almost had to. But by that time, you know, I've got one book with 7 slightly different versions in my head, and now I've got 14 books in the series, which is what is that? 98 slightly different versions of the books, which are floating around in my brain, plus all the things that I could have written and didn't, or did write and deleted. So, and then there's all the short stories and stuff running around out there too. Right. So it's like, no, where's the Fan Wiki? I've got to have something concrete. Okay, there it is. All right, that's how old Daniel Carpenter is. Good, got it.
Yeah, when you put it that way, that's very
it really
daunting.
is, and it's one of those things that you don't realize until you're in the middle of doing it, and then you kind of look around and it's like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? But yeah, as I go along, my own self-referencing and self-fact-checking has got to be that much more militant every book, you know. So
right, cool. Now, obviously, as well, there was a few years ago, the Dresden Files TV show.
The TV show.
It's on SyFy. It did not make it.
No, it did not.
You know, Paul Blackstone was your Harry.
Yes.
And they made some slight modifications.
Yeah, here and there.
Yeah.
Just a few.
How involved were you? And would you actively pursue going back to either film or television to do a story?
I was barely involved at all because they did not want me involved.
Wow. Okay.
I did have a little bit of influence on the show, but only because Robert Wolf, who was the showrunner on the show, is a giant nerd. And and we sat down and we hit it off right away, and right. We sat around and talked and D&D campaigns we'd run and stuff like that over Chinese, and he decided that I was okay, and I decided I didn't mind him too much, and so he was very good about calling me up and saying, hey, what do you think about this, or what do you think about that,
right.
And do you have any suggestions for who we should cast, and so on, and because we can audition all kinds of people. And I think he genuinely tried to come as close to the books as he could, because he said the books are great, they're a lot of fun, I don't see any reason why we should change things around if we don't
right.
have to. And unfortunately, he wasn't the only voice in what was going to get changed on the show.
Yeah.
And so the show, which was originally scheduled to be a serial, got changed into episodes like 2 weeks before they started shooting. And they're like, we don't have time to rewrite everything into just episodes. They're like, oh, just change everybody's names. There'll be episodes. People don't like serials. It's like, yeah, people hate serials. Like, you know, like Battlestar Galactica. They hate those.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody likes Lost.
Yeah.
Nobody likes Game of Thrones.
Yeah. They hate that stuff.
Yeah. Now, of course, some of those things weren't around at that time, but it's a shame because I remember watching it, and that was actually one of my first introductions to the character, but I didn't really get it because I hadn't read any of the books, and then
right.
when I finally read Turncoat, as I mentioned, it was the first one, I was like, shit, this is not...
It wasn't much like the TV show, no.
Yeah, like Ancient Mai is ancient.
Right.
Not this hot young, youngish Asian woman.
Oh, the Ancient Mai that was in the pilot was about 17.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. and you meet her. She's eating barbecued ribs to the Beastie Boys. They do this whole riff on the Beastie Boys while she's eating barbecued ribs while Harry's coming in, and she starts delivering threats to him and so on. And I loved that scene. It was a good scene. It wasn't the scene I would have written,
right?
But it was kind of cool. But that was in the pilot. That was the unaired pilot. It was the 2-hour-long thing. It was really very close to Stormfront.
Cool.
And I really wish that they'd been able to stick with that, but they weren't.
Yeah, TV. It's a mess.
There are all these concerns. Apparently it costs them money to blow up Chicago if that's what needs to happen. So they have to be thinking about these things.
Yeah, because you've got like $1 billion budget every time you write a book.
Yeah, exactly. I can do as much special effects as I want.
Because I just think about like Deadbeat being filmed in any way.
Right. And it would be kind of pricey. Yeah.
It would be amazing.
It would be cool if they did it right.
Because honestly,
honestly, if they did like terrible, bad, cheesy special effects and so on, I would love it just as much. I mean, me personally, I love cheesy sci-fi, but
because really, watching a guy ride a Tyrannosaurus Rex, like,
right.
How cool is that?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that was one of my happier moments as a writer. I've been waiting to do that for years. So
yeah, because that book has that scene, and Polka Will Never Die.
Yes.
Bar none, 2 best scenes. No offense to anything else you've written in the series. My favorites.
That was because there were zombies all around it.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't me. That was the power of zombies.
Yeah.
Making that book cooler.